Nestled just about an hour southwest of Indianapolis, Bloomington, Indiana is the most beautiful area of the state of Indiana. Whether it's its amazing forests, lakes, caves, or just awesome scenery, Bloomington, Indiana is really a special place, but in terms of sports, it has not exactly been known as a football mecca by any means. If you go up a couple hours to South Bend, you'll have Notre Dame, which is one of the most prestigious programs in college football history, and just 2 hours north is West Lafayette, where Purdue football is located. They've had their moments and some great quarterbacks, but Bloomington, Indiana is not known for football success. They are instead known for basketball success. Under a couple legendary head coaches such as Bob Knight, the Indiana Hoosiers have had one of the most proud and prestigious basketball programs in college basketball history, and while they have fallen on hard times, this area is in love with basketball. Indiana is the basketball state, and everyone here lives and breathes hoops. This year in Bloomington, Indiana, things are a little bit different. The football team is 5-0 for the first time in a long time. There's genuine excitement around the football program, and this year's Hoosiers team has a remote chance at making it to the college football playoff. Yes, I'm not even joking. Indiana is currently 5-0. They have one of the weakest schedules remaining in college football, and first-year head coach Curt Cignetti has rebuilt this dead program into a solid team in less than 1 calendar year. Today, I'm going to talk about how he did that. How did Coach Cignetti rebuild Indiana football? What has made the Hoosiers so good this year? And how good could they be for the rest of the season? But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the impossible rise of Indiana football. Bloomington, Indiana is special to me as I was a student there during the 2020 insane season with Michael Penix, and just the area is beautiful and everything about Indiana University is awesome. But besides a brief 2-year stint in 2019 and 2020, the Hoosiers football program has been historically awful. You've all heard about how bad Indiana is, as at one point when Lee Corso was the head coach, he went over and took a picture of the scoreboard because they were beating Ohio State. As we get into the 2010s, they hired a guy by the name of Kevin Wilson from Oklahoma, and he would finally start to bring some star power to the team. You had a couple of big names on offense, as you would star running backs like Jordan Howard and Tevin Coleman, and then you had Nate Sudfeld, who at one point was an NFL quarterback. Sadly, Kevin Wilson was not able to make it there though, as there were a lot of allegations of him rushing players back from injury, and that coupled with the fact that he wasn't getting Indiana to a sustainably winning program, it was time for them to move in a new direction. What did the Hoosiers end up doing? Well, they decided to promote from within and got their guy, Tom Allen. Allen seemed like the perfect fit for the Indiana Hoosiers. He was born in Newcastle, Indiana, and spent a ton of time as a head coach in the state, most notably as the head coach at Ben Davis, which is a powerhouse high school up in Indianapolis. From there, he would climb the coaching ladder from Wabash to Drake to Arkansas State, and eventually both Ole Miss and South Florida before he became the DC in 2016. In 2017, they'd take the DC tag off of him and make him the head coach, and not many people nationally were talking about this hire. If you go 2 hours up the road, everybody was raving about Jeff Brom, the guy that Purdue had just hired, and for a little while, it looked like Jeff Brom was a home run and Tom Allen was a complete fluke. But eventually, Allen would almost match Brom in terms of success there. But first, things were tough. In 2017, Indiana had JUCO quarterback Richard Lego, and Morgan Ellison became the top running back. You had future NFL tight end Ian Thomas, but this didn't exactly translate to many wins. They got stomped on by J.K. Dobbins on that Thursday night game in Week 1, and from there, their only big win of the season came on the road against Virginia in Week 2. That was kind of surprising in retrospect. They did beat Illinois and Rutgers to finish the season, but ultimately they lost to Purdue in the Oaken Bucket game, and they would miss a bowl game going 5-7. In 2018, Tom Allen had found a couple of gems, as Peyton Ramsey ended up becoming the quarterback, true freshman linebacker Stevie Scott moved to running back and became a star, and then he found a couple of really talented receivers in Nick Westbrook, Ty Freifogel, and Whop Philyor. You also cannot forget Donovan Hale, but Indiana football was still not able to really get that much going. In Week 2, they beat Virginia in a monsoon game, 20-16, which was a lot of fun, and then they'd end up only winning 2 games in Big Ten Conference play. They went on the road and beat Rutgers at the end of September, and then in November they would beat Maryland 34-32. Still though, they were in position to make a bowl game if they could just knock off Purdue in the Oaken Bucket game. Rondale Moore ended up going insane in this one, and Purdue would go into Bloomington, win this game, and for the second straight season, the Hoosiers would end up missing out on a bowl game. Through the first 2 years of the Tom Allen era, he was 10-14. He really needed to figure out some things here soon, and luckily in 2019, they would finally break out. Peyton Ramsey ended up becoming a star, and then we also saw some flash from Michael Penix Jr. And then at the running back spot, Stevie Scott once again was one of the top backs in the Big Ten. Whop Phillier emerged as an 1,000-yard All-Big Ten level receiver. Peyton Hendershot increased his NFL draft stock, and both Ty Freifogel and Nick Westbrook would also have big seasons. Their underrated 2-star gem linebacker Micah McFadden also became one of the top defensive players in the conference, and this finally led to Indiana breaking out. In Week 1, they would beat Ball State, and then in Week 2, they'd beat Eastern Illinois. There was some hype for their game against Ohio State in Week 3, but they got blasted 51-10. From there, they lost to UConn 38-3, and then had an insane meltdown in a loss to number 25 Michigan State. Indiana should have lost this game, but they were still 3-2 with an opportunity to salvage their season. This is when they went on a 4-game winning streak. They beat Rutgers 35-0, and Michael Penix played well in that game, and then Peyton Ramsey came back and helped them beat both Maryland and Nebraska on the road. Both of these wins came by 1 touchdown, and all of a sudden, Indiana was bowl eligible at the end of October. That is an extreme rarity. They would then follow it up with a win against Northwestern, before they would then lose to the best 2 teams on their schedule remaining in number 9 Penn State and number 13 Michigan. They actually held it close with Penn State on the road, but did ultimately get killed by Michigan at home. For the final regular season game, they would play Purdue in the Old Oak and Bucket matchup, and this game was nuts. It ended up going to double overtime, but after a couple of weird trick plays and some Aiden O'Connell magic, Purdue had an opportunity to win, but ultimately Indiana would survive 44-41 in double overtime. Indiana would qualify to play in the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl, where they would play against Tennessee. Sadly, they ended up blowing it in Indiana fashion as they gave up an onside kick, and Tennessee eventually won by 1 point. The Hoosiers ended up going 8-5, and all of a sudden, Tom Allen was slowly starting to build something here. 2020, though, would be the epitome of the rise of Indiana football and head coach Tom Allen. Peyton Ramsey had transferred off to Northwestern, and Michael Penix would now take over as the full-time starter, and they also had Jack Tuttle, the Utah transfer, in as the backup. Stevie Scott was back for his 3rd straight year starting at the running back position, and Ty Freifogel and Whop Phillier and Hendershot were all back to make up a really solid receiving core. Future NFL players like Micah McFadden, Jamar Johnson, Tywan Mullen, and Cam Jones were all on the defensive side of the ball, and everything I guess just sort of clicked for Indiana. They started out the season unranked, but would quickly be thrusted into the national spotlight as number 8 Penn State would come into town. This game went back and forth, and Penn State had the win, but unfortunately Penn State ran in for a late score, and then Indiana was able to tie it and send it to OT. Well, in overtime, Indiana would score, and Michael Penix had his famous insane dive for a 2-point conversion. Still to this day, no one really knows if that should have counted, but I guess it depends on who you ask. If you ask Indiana fans, the ball crossed the plane. If you ask Penn State fans, the ball touched the ground. It's really as simple as that. This was insane for Indiana, as they would then jump into the polls and then would beat Rutgers and even killed number 23 Michigan at home. Indiana was now 3-0, and after blanking Michigan State 24-0, Tom Allen and Indiana football were on top of the world. Tom Allen's famous catchphrase of "love each other" became mainstream, and players like Michael Penix and Ty Freifogel became a huge deal. They ended up facing off with an undefeated Ohio State game, and in one of the best duels of the season, Michael Penix Jr. would throw for nearly 500 yards, but they would ultimately lose on the road to number 3 Ohio State by a touchdown. Things were still going well for Indiana, as they had an opportunity to have an insane season, but then against Maryland, tragedy would strike. Michael Penix Jr. would hurt his knee again, and while Jack Tuttle would do the job and help them beat Maryland, everyone knew the season was not going to be the same. They then went on the road and beat number 16 Wisconsin in Camp Randall before the rest of their games would get canceled. They'd ultimately play in the Outback Bowl against Ole Miss, and they would lose this game by 6 points. It was extremely tough, but Indiana had a really solid season in which they went 6-2, and at one point were getting national attention. That's why going into 2021, Indiana was a preseason top 25 team for the first time in what felt like forever. Tom Allen was an extremely solid coach, and it looked like everything was getting fixed with him. They played against number 18 Iowa in Week 1 of the 2021 season, and this was the end of Indiana football. They got blown out 34-6, the game was over in the first quarter, and Indiana lost all momentum they could have had. While they did beat Idaho and Western Kentucky, Indiana would lose 9 of their last 10 games and would finish with a 2-10 record and an 0-9 mark in the Big Ten. This was absolutely heartbreaking. Michael Penix Jr. once again got hurt, USC transfer Stephen Carr struggled, and former All-Big Ten receiver Ty Freifogel ended up falling off. The sky was pretty much falling here in Indiana, and in 2022, things didn't get much better. They had Mizzou transfer Connor Bazelak at quarterback and Auburn transfer Sean Shivers at running back, but still Indiana was really not able to get that much going, as their only big win came against Illinois in Week 1, and other than that, they only beat Idaho, Western Kentucky, and Michigan State, and they finished with an abysmal 4-8 record. 2023 was somewhat exciting, but they still had a terrible record, as they did almost beat Louisville and Indianapolis, and had some really thrilling games against both Penn State and Illinois, but ultimately they would lose a couple of close games to finish the year, and they would go 3-9 with a 1-8 mark in the conference. Taven Jackson was the starter to begin the season, but by the end of the year, their former 3-star recruit Brendan Sorsby had taken off. Donovan McCulley also became one of the better receivers in the Big Ten, and while Indiana had a couple of pieces, everyone knew it was time to move on from Tom Allen. Tom Allen would be fired and would move over to Penn State to become their defensive coordinator, and now Indiana was in a position where they would need to find a new quarterback, would have to reflip the roster, find a new coach, and have to change the direction of the entire program. That's where we get to meet Curt Cignetti. The son of legendary college football coach Frank Cignetti Jr., Curt was just like his dad. He ended up coaching at Indiana University in Pennsylvania for a couple of years before he then went to Elon and then took over at James Madison in 2019. In 2019, the Dukes would go 14-2. In 2020, they go 7-1, and then in 2021, they would go 12-2. James Madison had become one of the better FCS programs and decided to move up to the Sun Belt. In his first season in 2022, JMU would go 8-3, and then last year they broke out into the college football mainstream, going 11-1. JMU had a nearly perfect transition to the FBS, and now Indiana decided to make him their new head coach. Nationally, people definitely respected this hire. Cignetti said, quote, "I'm excited to lead this program forward and change the culture, mindset, and expectation level of Hoosier football. I want to thank the director of athletics, Scott Dolson, and I look forward to building something special in Indiana. They both share my vision and believe that big things are ahead for the IU football program." Cignetti went 52-9 at JMU, including a 31-4 record in conference play, and he was seen as a no-nonsense coach that was going to get things done. The first thing Coach Sig would have to do is flip the roster. In terms of recruiting, his big get was Tyler Cherry, who on some sites was the top 10 quarterback in the class of 2024, as he got him, but most importantly, he brought in 31 transfers. All of these guys are ready to come in with a chip on their shoulder, and some of the main weapons included Elijah Surratt, a receiver from JMU, running back Elijah Green, tight end Zach Horton, linebacker Aiden Fisher, and then two more running backs in Tyson Lawton and Kaylon Black. Obviously there's a couple of more, but the big dude was Curtis Rourke. Curtis Rourke was the brother of Nathan Rourke, who was a legendary Ohio quarterback, and Curtis followed in his footsteps and became a star for the Bobcats. In his final year of eligibility, Rourke would decide to transfer over to Indiana. The Hoosiers also returned Taven Jackson at quarterback, and then had true freshman Alberto Mendoza and Tyler Cherry, who was a blue chip. Still though, there was not really that high of expectations. They were picked to finish dead last in the Big Ten, but here's where I get to flex a little bit, as I made a video back in July talking about how Indiana was the secret team that no one wanted to play. At this point, I was dead right, as I said the Hoosiers would go 7-5 and be a tough test to teams. That is exactly what would end up happening, and so far, Indiana has had a tremendous season. I want to start out talking about 2024 with a quote from Sig. A recent CBS article said, quote, "Why wouldn't a 63-year-old who's seen it all walk around like he's done it all?" Well, Coach Sig said it's pretty simple. I win. Google me. Honestly, that is the best quote that describes Coach Sig, as he is a complete no-nonsense coach, and he has won every single place he's been at. Currently, the team sits at 5-0, as in Week 1, they would destroy Florida International 31-7, and in Week 2, they would kill Western Illinois 77-3. Yes, neither of those teams were that great, but in Week 3, they did something that Indiana football never does. They went on the road and beat a Big Ten team. Not only did they beat UCLA, but they absolutely sent them to the woodshed. They would take care of the Bruins 42-13, and all of a sudden, Indiana football was looking legit. I know people are going to clown on them saying that it's only UCLA, but people don't realize how bad Indiana football usually is and how rare it is that they win road games like that. To do that in year 1 was tremendous. In Week 4, Indiana came back and beat Charlotte 52-14. Then this past weekend, we saw the epitome of what new Indiana is. In a game against Maryland, they would end up winning 42-28, but they had 4 turnovers. Yes, they had 4 turnovers and Maryland had 0, and they still found a way to win 42-28. To me, that's actually absurd, and a lot of that can be put on the shoulders of quarterback Curtis Rourke. So far, he's thrown for 1,400 yards with 11 touchdowns and just 2 interceptions, both of which were in that Maryland game. And then they have a 4-man running back room. Kaylon Black, Elijah Green, Tyson Lawton, and Justice Ellison are all doing a tremendous job for Indiana at the running back spot. And then in terms of the receivers, Elijah Surratt leads the team with 22 catches for 378 yards and 2 touchdowns. Omar Cooper and Keyshawn Williams each have 3 touchdowns apiece. And Miles Price and Miles Cross are also solid contributors. Honestly, they have so much depth at both the running back and receiver position that the best player out of those 10 isn't even playing. His name was Donovan McCulley. He was a 4-star quarterback recruit from up in Indianapolis, but he flipped to the receiver spot and actually became the top wideout on last year's team. And if he would have entered the portal, he would have got a ton of offers to play at a very high level of college football. He instead decided to come back, but because he was struggling with injury, he did not play much this season, and the other receivers have done so well that he actually entered the portal a couple days ago. That honestly says a lot. In terms of the defense, Aiden Fisher leads the way with 50 tackles. Jamari Sharp has been tremendous at DB as he already has 5 pass deflections. Amari Farrell has 2 interceptions. And Mikal Kamara has 4 sacks, and James Carpenter has 3 sacks on the defensive line. Curt Cignetti's goal was to dream big at Indiana, and he's doing it at a place where winning at football is impossible. Indiana has one of the worst win percentages of all time, and this shouldn't shock anyone. Coach Sig has been doing this everywhere he's been. He was Nick Saban's recruiting coordinator and landed guys like Julio Jones, Dante Hightower, and Mark Ingram. He turned the Indiana University Pennsylvania program into a complete winner and also led JMU into the most successful FCS to FBS transition of all time. Cignetti has coaching in his DNA, and I believe Indiana could have a special season. How special are we talking? Well, there's a remote chance they could make it to the college football playoff. They play Northwestern this upcoming Saturday, and that's a game that they absolutely should win. After that, they come home and play against both Nebraska and Washington, and while the Nebraska game is somewhat tricky to me, I don't think Washington is all that good, and I think Indiana can handle Nebraska at home. They get Michigan State on the road, who is starting to fall off a lot, and they also have Purdue at home, who is the worst team in the Big Ten. The 2 big games to watch are at home against number 10 Michigan and on the road against number 3 Ohio State. Michigan has not looked as dominant as they've been the last couple of years, so honestly, the only game on this schedule that I would say is unwinnable for Indiana is that road trip to Ohio State. Ultimately, if I had to put money on it, I'm going to say that Indiana goes 9-3 or 10-2, but maybe I shouldn't doubt Coach Sig. Maybe he will be able to beat Northwestern, Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State, Michigan, and Purdue, and get Indiana to the college football playoff in year 1 if things go his way. That would be absolutely absurd, but at the same time, it's not out of question. What Coach Sig has done in Indiana is special, and I'm glad that I got to tell you guys the story of his rebuild in today's video. But what do you guys think? If you're an Indiana football fan, what do you think of this year's turnaround? What other programs should I talk about next? And how good do you think Indiana football will be? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.